6 months had passed since Maya's final judgment upon the villagers, and Calvary had become a place that existed more in memory than reality. The physical village remained, its houses and streets unchanged, but the community that had once thrived there was gone forever. People moved through their days like actors playing roles they no longer understood, going through motions that had lost all meaning. Maya watched from her temple as the last of the original families prepared to leave. The Sharma family loaded, their possessions onto a bullock cart, their faces hollow with the weight of sleepless nights and waking nightmares. Little Radha Sharma, who had once played with dolls near Maya's home, now flinched at the sight of her own shadow and spoke only, in whispers about bad dreams that never ended. This exodus had been happening gradually since the night of Maya's ceremony. First, the young families left, unable to bear raising children in a place where innocence had been so thoroughly corrupted. Then the elderly began departing to live with relatives in distant towns, claiming they could no longer tolerate the weight of memories that pressed down on them like physical things. Even those who remained were changed beyond recognition. Pandit Shukla had stopped performing religious ceremonies entirely, claiming that every prayer he attempted turned to ash in his mouth. He spent his days sitting by the dried-up temple well, staring at nothing and occasionally laughing at jokes only he could hear. The holy man who had once raised a knife over a baby now couldn't bear to be in the same room as children. Sita, the school teacher, had closed the village school after repeatedly breaking down in tears while trying to teach. Every child's face reminded her of Priya. Every innocent question became an accusation. Every lesson about right and wrong felt like mockery of her own actions. She now worked as a cleaning woman in a town 50 miles away, scrubbing floors and avoiding conversation with anyone who might ask about her past. The younger villagers suffered even more acutely. Mohan, who had volunteered to make Priya's death quick and painless, developed a condition where he could only sleep for minutes at a time before waking in terror. His hair had turned completely white, and he aged visibly each day, as if Maya's curse was consuming his very life force. He walked the village streets at all hours, muttering apologies to people who weren't there and flinching at sounds that existed only in his tormented mind. But Maya's masterpiece was the transformation of the village itself. The place that had once buzzed with community life, festival celebrations, and shared traditions had become a hollow shell where even the buildings seemed to reflect the spiritual emptiness of their inhabitants. Crops failed despite perfect weather, animals refused to breed, and even the river that had flowed through Calvary for centuries began to run muddy and bitter. New people occasionally arrived, drawn by cheap land prices and stories of a peaceful rural community. They never stayed long. Within days of settling in Calvary, newcomers would report strange dreams, unexplained anxieties, and a persistent feeling that they were being watched by unseen judges. Most packed up and left within a week, spreading stories about the cursed village that ensured few others would make the same mistake. Maya had achieved something that went beyond personal revenge. She had created a living monument to the consequences of moral failure, a place where the very air carried lessons about the price of betraying innocence. The village had become her greatest work of art, a masterpiece painted in guilt and regret that would teach future generations about the true nature of evil. Priya had grown into a remarkable child during these months, developing with a speed and intelligence that would have been alarming in any other context. She could speak in complete sentences before her first birthday, displayed an uncanny ability to sense people's emotions and intentions, and seemed to possess knowledge that she couldn't possibly have acquired through normal learning. Maya told herself that her daughter was simply gifted, but she knew the truth was more complex and potentially more dangerous. The child who had been marked for sacrifice had indeed been transformed by the experience, though not in the way the villagers had intended. Priya carried within her the concentrated essence of her mother's fury and the distilled pain of everyone who had suffered in Calvary. She was becoming something unprecedented, a living embodiment of justice that would grow up understanding the true weight of moral choices. On this particular evening, as Maya sat in her temple watching the latest family flee the village, she felt a presence approaching that she hadn't sensed in months. Her husband Arjun was returning from the city, finally responding to letters that had described events he couldn't possibly believe or understand. Maya watched from her window as he walked through the village streets, his face showing confusion and growing horror at what he found. The bustling community he had left behind had been replaced by a ghost town populated by the walking wounded. When he reached their old home and found it empty, his shoulders sagged with a despair that Maya could feel even from a distance. She could have gone to him, could have explained everything, could have tried to rebuild some version of their old life together. But the woman who had been his wife was gone, transformed into something that could never again fit into the simple happiness they had once shared. Maya had become justice personified, and justice could not return to being merely human. Instead, she sent Dara to guide him to the temple. When Arjun finally stood before her, his face showed the same expression she had seen on every villager who truly understood what had happened in Kalvari, a mixture of awe, terror, and profound regret for a world that could produce such transformations. They tried to kill our daughter, Maya said simply, making no attempt to soften the truth. Everyone you trusted, everyone we called family, everyone who blessed our marriage and celebrated Priya's birth, they gathered in darkness to murder her for their superstitious beliefs. Arjun looked at Priya, who sat playing with toys that seemed to move on their own, and Maya could see him trying to reconcile the innocent child before him with the cosmic forces her near sacrifice had unleashed. "What have you become?" he whispered, and the question held no accusation, only genuine wonder at the scope of her transformation. Maya smiled, and for the first time in months, the expression held warmth alongside its terrible power. "I became what they made necessary. I became the mother who would ensure that no other child would ever face what our daughter faced." She gestured toward the window, where the lights of departing families could be seen moving slowly away from Kalvari. "They will carry the story with them wherever they go. They will tell their children and their children's children about the village that tried to sacrifice innocence and paid a price that lasted generations. The lesson will spread far beyond these hills, and perhaps other communities will remember it when they face similar temptations." Arjun sat heavily in a chair that materialized from the shadows, his face aging years in moments as he processed the full implications of what his wife had accomplished. "And us? What happens to our family now?" Maya looked at Priya, who had stopped playing and was watching her parents with eyes that held understanding far beyond her age. "We guard the lesson," she said finally. "We make sure that what happened here is never forgotten, and we raise our daughter to understand both the power of justice and the responsibility that comes with it." The village of Kalvari would eventually be abandoned completely, its empty buildings becoming home only to wild animals and the whispered warnings of travelers who passed through. But the story would live on, spreading from town to town and generation to generation, carrying Maya's ultimate message: that innocence deserves protection, that evil choices have consequences, and that sometimes the only justice possible is the kind that transforms the world itself. 3 weeks had passed since the failed ritual, and Kalvari village had become a place where nightmares walked in broad daylight. The cursed villagers moved through their daily routines like broken dolls, their eyes hollow and their movements mechanical. Children refused to play outside, adults spoke in whispers, and the once bustling marketplace had become a place of nervous glances and hurried transactions. Maya had not returned to her old home. Instead, she had claimed the ruins of the ancient temple as her domain, rebuilding it according to designs that existed only in her transformed mind. The outcasts worked alongside her, their combined knowledge creating something that was part sanctuary, part fortress, and part doorway to powers the village could never comprehend. Priya thrived in this environment, growing faster and stronger than any normal child should. At less than 2 months old, she could already focus her eyes with startling intelligence and seemed to respond to the dark energies that now surrounded her mother. Maya told herself that her daughter was simply resilient, but deep in her heart, she wondered if the attempted sacrifice had indeed awakened something extraordinary in the child. The village's attempts to fight back had been pathetically inadequate. They had hired holy men from neighboring towns, brought in experts on curses and supernatural phenomena, even contacted government officials who dismissed their claims as mass hysteria. Nothing worked because Maya's revenge operated on levels. They couldn't understand or combat. She had not simply cursed them, she had made them complicit in their own destruction. Every guilty conscience became a weapon turned inward. Every suppressed doubt about their actions became a source of constant torment. The village was destroying itself from within, and Maya was merely the catalyst for their self-imposed justice. But Maya's true masterpiece was yet to come. She had spent weeks studying each villager who had participated in the ritual, learning their weaknesses, their deepest fears, their most precious relationships. Tonight, she would demonstrate the difference between their crude attempts at supernatural manipulation and the refined artistry of genuine power. The evening began like any other in the cursed village. Children refusing to eat dinner, adults jumping at shadows, families gathering in central rooms to avoid the isolation of separate bedrooms. But as night fell, something different happened. One by one, the villagers began walking from their homes toward the rebuilt temple, their movements synchronized like dancers responding to unheard music. They came not in groups, but individually, each following a path that seemed designed specifically for them. Maya watched from the temple's highest point as Pandit Shukla emerged from his home, walked past the empty tea shop, and trudged up the hill with the mechanical precision of a wind-up toy. Sita, the schoolteacher, came from the opposite direction, her usual confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone carrying unbearable weight. One by one, they arrived at the temple grounds and arranged themselves in a perfect circle, around the altar where they had once tried to sacrifice Priya. They stood motionless, their eyes open but unfocused, waiting for whatever their subconscious minds had compelled them to witness. Maya descended from her vantage point, carrying Priya in her arms. The baby was awake and alert, her unusual eyes taking in the scene with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her age. When Maya reached the center of the circle, she set her daughter in a wooden cradle that sat exactly where the sacrificial altar had once been. "You gathered here once before," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly to every villager despite being barely above a whisper. "You brought knives and prayers, ropes and rituals, believing that innocent blood could purchase your safety." The villagers remained motionless, but Maya could see awareness flickering behind their glassy stares. They were conscious of what was happening but powerless to change or escape it. "Tonight, you will understand what you nearly unleashed," Maya continued. "Not through your crude ceremony, but through the consequences of your own choices," she began, walking around the circle, stopping before each villager to speak directly to them. Her words were not curses or incantations, but simple statements of truth that cut deeper than any blade. To Pandit Shukla, "You perverted your sacred calling to justify murder. Now you will spend your remaining days unable to distinguish between your prayers and your nightmares. To Sita, you used your education to rationalize barbarism. Now every word you speak will remind you of the lies you told yourself that night. To young Mohan, you offered to make my daughter's death quick and painless. Now you will feel every moment of her terror for the rest of your life. One by one, she addressed them all, speaking their individual judgments with the authority of someone who had been transformed from victim to judge. Each word she spoke became reality, reshaping their minds and souls in ways that would make their remaining years a living testament to the price of their actions. But Maya's greatest revelation came when she reached Kamala, her mother-in-law, who stood with tears streaming down her motionless face. "You betrayed the trust of family," Maya said, and for the first time her voice carried genuine grief alongside the cold fury. "You chose village superstition over your granddaughter's life. You will live, but you will live knowing that you helped murder the future you claimed to protect." As dawn approached, Maya completed her circle and returned to stand beside Priya's cradle. The villagers remained frozen, but their eyes now showed full awareness of their situation and complete understanding of what had been done to them. "I could kill you all," Maya said, her voice echoing off the temple walls. "I could end your suffering and call your deaths justice, but death would be mercy you don't deserve. Instead, you will live with the consequences of your choices, and you will remember every single day why you brought this upon yourselves." She picked up Priya, who had remained calm throughout the entire ceremony, and began walking toward the temple entrance. Behind her, the villagers started to move again, but their movements were different now, more careful, more fearful, and infinitely more aware of the fragility of the innocents they had tried to destroy. As Maya reached the temple's threshold, she turned back one final time to address the gathering. "Your village will survive, but it will never be the same. Every child born here will grow up hearing the story of what you tried to do, and every generation will remember the price of choosing fear over love." The sun crested the hills as Maya disappeared into the temple's shadows, leaving the villagers to face their new reality. Some would leave Kalvari within days, unable to bear the weight of their transformed existence. Others would remain, living monuments to the consequences of their actions, their very presence serving as a warning to future generations. In the distance, smoke rose from cooking fires as the village slowly awakened to another day in their changed world. But Maya's work was not yet complete. The personal reckonings she had delivered were only the beginning of her grand design for justice. The true scope of her revenge would unfold over months and years, touching every aspect of life in Kalvari until the very name of the village became synonymous with the price of betraying innocence. Kiran appeared beside her in the temple's inner chamber, his scarred face showing something that might have been respect or fear. "You have exceeded even our expectations," he said quietly. "The village will carry your mark for generations." Maya nodded, settling Priya into an ornate cradle that seemed to have appeared overnight. "They wanted to use my daughter's death to protect their future. Instead, they ensured that their future would forever be shaped by their willingness to murder her." She looked out through the temple's windows at the village below, where people moved like ghosts through streets that no longer felt like home. Justice is not always swift, but it is always complete. Dawn broke over Kalvari village like a wound bleeding light across the sky. The temple lay in ruins, its ancient stones blackened and broken, the sacred ground scarred by fires that had burned with unnatural colors throughout the night. Bodies littered the courtyard. Not dead, but broken in ways that death might have been merciful by comparison. Maya stood at the edge of the forest, watching the sunrise illuminate the destruction. Priya slept peacefully against her chest, unaware that her mother was no longer the same woman who had rocked her to sleep just yesterday. The transformation that had begun in the temple's darkness was now complete, and Maya felt power flowing through her veins like liquid fire. Kiran approached silently, his face grim but satisfied. "The ones who fled made it to their homes, but they will never sleep peacefully again. The ones who stayed—" He gestured toward the temple grounds where figures moved with strange, jerky motions. "They learned what it means to truly commune with darkness. Maya studied the scene with eyes that now saw far more than they had before. They're still alive, in a manner of speaking. Their bodies function, but their minds have been touched by visions of what they nearly brought into this world through their ritual. They will spend their remaining days reliving every moment of their daughter's terror, feeling it as if it were their own children on that altar. The scarred woman who had helped Maya escape emerged from behind a tree. In daylight, Maya could see that her face bore marks that looked deliberately inflicted, punishment scars from some past judgment. Her silver hair moved in the morning breeze like liquid metal. "I am Dara," she said, her voice carrying an accent Maya couldn't place. "Like the others, I was cast out by this village years ago. They said I practiced forbidden arts, communed with demons, corrupted their precious purity." She smiled, and the expression was both beautiful and terrifying. They were not entirely wrong. Maya felt no fear looking at this woman who had helped save her daughter. "What happens now?" "Now you choose how complete your revenge will be," Dara replied. "We have given you the power to match their cruelty with your own. But power without purpose is mere destruction. You must decide what justice looks like." Through the morning mist, Maya could see villagers emerging from their homes, discovering the aftermath of the night's events. Their voices carried across the distance, confusion, terror, and growing anger as they realized the scope of what had occurred. Soon they would begin looking for someone to blame, and Maya knew exactly who they would choose. "They will come. For me," she said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Kieran nodded. "Before noon, they will gather whatever courage they can find and march on the forest. They will tell themselves that you brought evil to their village, that you are responsible for their suffering. It will be easier than admitting they tried to murder an innocent child." Maya felt something cold and calculating settle in her chest. "Let them come. I want to see their faces when they realize what they're truly dealing with." She spent the morning learning from her unlikely teachers. Dara showed her how to see the connections between all living things, how to find the threads of fear and guilt that bound the villagers together. Kieran taught her to speak words that could plant nightmares in sleeping minds and turn courage into paralyzing terror. Other outcasts shared knowledge of herbs that could induce madness, of symbols that could trap souls, of rituals that could turn the village's own superstitions against them. But the most important lesson came from within, herself. Maya discovered that maternal love, when twisted by betrayal and fury, could become a force more destructive than any magic or curse. Every protective instinct she felt for Priya had been inverted, transformed into an equally powerful desire to destroy those who had threatened her child. Around midday, as predicted, a group of villagers approached the forest edge. They carried farming tools as weapons and holy symbols as shields, their faces painted with ash and their voices raised in nervous chants. At their head walked the survivors of the previous night's failed ritual, Pandit Shukla, his eyes now holding a haunted quality that spoke of visions he could never unsee, and several others who moved like people walking through a permanent nightmare. Maya stepped out of the forest to meet them, carrying Priya in one arm and radiating a presence that made the very air around her seem to shimmer with dangerous energy. The villagers stopped 20 feet away, their chanting faltering as they saw what she had become. "You bring your prayers and your symbols," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "But what god will protect you from a mother's fury? What ritual will cleanse you of innocent blood you tried to spill?" Pandit Shukla raised a wooden cross, his hands shaking. "You have been corrupted by demons. The evil you've brought upon our village proves that your child was marked for darkness." Maya laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass in the morning air. "My child was marked for nothing but your superstitious murder. You created this darkness when you decided that your fears were worth more than her life." One of the younger men Someone Maya had once considered a friend stepped forward with a crude spear. "Return to your home, Maya. Leave the village and never come back, and we will not pursue you further." "Return to my home." Maya's expression shifted into something that made several villagers step backward. "The home where you invaded in the night? The home where you bound me and stole my child? That home no longer exists, because the woman who lived there died on your altar." She raised her free hand, and the symbols the villagers carried began to smoke and crack. Their protective chants turned to screams as the very items they trusted for safety became sources of burning pain. "You want to know what evil looks like?" Maya continued, walking slowly toward the retreating group. "Evil looks like neighbors who plot murder in darkness. Evil sounds like prayers used to justify killing children. Evil feels like the betrayal of trust by people you loved." The villagers broke and ran, some dropping their weapons, others clutching at burns where their holy symbols had seared their flesh. But Maya was not finished with them. As they fled, she spoke words that Dara had taught her, words that would follow them into their homes and their dreams. "You will know no peace," her voice carried on the wind, reaching every fleeing figure. "Every night you will dream of children crying for their mothers. Every day you will see the faces of the innocents you would have sacrificed. And every moment you will remember that you chose this fate when you decided that murder could be made holy with the right prayers." By evening, the effects of Maya's curse had begun to manifest throughout the village. Children woke screaming from nightmares they couldn't explain. Adults found themselves unable to eat or sleep, plagued by visions of burning temples and crying. Babies. The very air seemed to carry whispers of accusation and judgment. Maya watched from the forest as lights burned in every window throughout the night, families huddled together against terrors that existed now in their own minds and hearts. She felt no satisfaction, only a cold certainty that this was merely the beginning of the justice she would bring to Kalvari village. Priya stirred in her arms, and Maya looked down at her daughter's innocent face. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and darker choices, but tonight she was content to let fear be her messenger, preparing the village for the reckoning that was yet to come. The ceremonial knife gleamed in the torchlight as Pandit Shukla raised it above Priya's tiny form. Maya's screams echoed off the temple walls, raw and desperate, but the sound seemed to energize the gathered villagers rather than move them to mercy. Their faces glowed with religious fervor, convinced they were witnessing a sacred act that would bring divine protection to their community. Just as the blade began its downward arc, a sound unlike anything Maya had ever heard split the night air. It was part animal roar, part human scream, and part something else entirely, something that made every person present freeze in terror. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through their bones and souls. The torches around the temple suddenly flared higher, casting wild shadows that danced like demons on the ancient walls. A wind rose from nowhere, howling through the temple grounds and extinguishing several flames. In the growing darkness, shapes began moving at the edges of the gathering, shapes that looked human but moved wrong, too fast and too fluid. Pandit. Shukla's hand trembled as he tried to complete the ritual, but his chanting faltered as fear crept into his voice. The other villagers began murmuring prayers and backing away from the altar, their certainty shaken by forces they couldn't understand or control. From the forest surrounding the temple, figures emerged into the flickering light. They wore ragged clothes and moved with predatory grace, their eyes reflecting the flames like those of wild animals. Maya recognized them with a mixture of hope and horror. They were the outcasts, the people the village had shunned and driven away over the years for various crimes and transgressions. Leading them was Kiran, a man the village had exiled 5 years ago for allegedly practicing black magic. His face was weathered and scarred, his hair wild and unkempt, but his eyes burned with intelligence and fury. Behind him came others. Maya barely remembered. Thieves, adulterers, those accused of witchcraft, people who had been cast out and left to survive in the wilderness. Release the child. Kiran's voice carried an authority that made even Pandit Shukla step back. Your ritual has awakened things better left sleeping, and now you face consequences you never imagined. The priest tried to maintain his composure, raising the knife again. You have no power here, outcast. This is sacred ground, and we perform the goddess's will. Kiran laughed, and the sound was more terrifying than his earlier roar. Sacred ground. You defile this place with innocent blood and call it holy. You've forgotten what true power looks like. What happened next would be remembered in Kalvari, village for generations, though few would ever speak of it openly. The outcasts moved through the gathered villagers like death itself, not killing, but spreading something worse. Fear so pure and complete that it broke minds and shattered souls. They carried weapons Maya had never seen before, tools that looked ancient and wrong, implements that seemed to whisper with malevolent purpose. But their most terrifying weapons were their eyes, which held knowledge of suffering and revenge that went beyond human comprehension. The villagers scattered like leaves before a storm, abandoning their religious fervor for basic survival instinct. Some ran screaming into the night, others collapsed where they stood, overwhelmed by terror. The carefully arranged ritual dissolved into chaos as people trampled each other in their desperation to escape. In the confusion, Maya felt her bonds. Being cut by hands, she couldn't see clearly. Someone, she thought it might be a woman with silver hair and scars across her face, pressed a bundle into her arms. It took her several precious seconds to realize it was Priya, alive and unharmed, but unconscious from the trauma. Take her and go, the scarred woman whispered urgently. This is not over. It's only beginning. The village will pay for what they tried to do, but you don't need to see it. Maya stumbled through the chaos, clutching her daughter and guided by hands that seemed to know exactly where to lead her. Behind her, she could hear sounds that would haunt her dreams, not screams of pain, but something worse. The sounds of people realizing that their safe, ordered world had been an illusion, and that real darkness had always been waiting just beyond their understanding. She found herself at the edge of the forest, far enough from the temple to feel momentarily safe. Priya stirred in her arms, opening her eyes and looking up at her mother with the same trusting gaze that had nearly been extinguished forever. Maya wept with relief, holding her daughter close and whispering promises that she would never let anyone hurt her again. But as the sounds from the temple grew more disturbing, Maya realized that her ordeal was far from over. The outcasts had saved her daughter, but at what cost? And what would happen when morning came and the village discovered what had occurred on their sacred ground? A figure approached through the trees. Kiran, the exiled man who had led the rescue. His face was gentler now, though still marked by years of hardship and isolation. Your daughter is safe, he said simply. But you cannot return to your old life. The village will blame you for tonight's events, and they will not forgive or forget what they believe you've cost them. Maya looked back toward the temple, where orange flames now rose higher than before. What's happening there? Kiran's expression darkened. Justice or revenge. The difference matters little to those who chose to murder innocents in the name of faith. He studied Maya's face in the firelight. You have a choice now. You can run far from here, start over somewhere the village can never find you, and try to forget this night ever happened. Or, Maya asked, though she already suspected what the alternative might be. Or you can stay and ensure that what happened tonight is remembered properly. That the people who tried to sacrifice your child face consequences beyond their worst nightmares. Kiran's eyes gleamed with possibilities that Maya was only beginning to understand. They awakened something in you tonight, something they will regret more than any curse or demon they ever feared." Maya looked down at Priya, who had fallen asleep again in her arms, trusting and innocent despite everything she had endured. Then she looked back at the burning temple, where people who had been her neighbors and friends had tried to murder her daughter for their superstitious beliefs. In that moment, Maya made the choice that would define everything that followed. She would not run, she would not forget, and she would make absolutely certain that every person who had participated in tonight's attempted sacrifice would understand exactly what they had unleashed when they decided that an innocent child's life was worth less than their twisted faith. Thisaber, old Maya, the trusting young mother who had believed in the basic goodness of people, died in the flames of that temple. What emerged from the ashes would be something the village of Calvary had never seen before, and something they would never survive. The villagers entered Maya's home like shadows given form, their faces covered but their intentions clear. At their head walked Pandit Shukla, the village priest, carrying a brass vessel that caught the moonlight streaming through the doorway. Maya had always respected him, had sought his blessings for her marriage and pregnancy, had trusted him with her family's spiritual needs. Now, seeing him lead this midnight invasion, she felt her world crumbling. "Give us the child, Maya." Pandit Shukla's voice was gentle but firm, as if he were asking for something as simple as a cup of tea. She must fulfill her destiny. The signs are clear, and the ritual must be completed before the new moon rises. Maya backed against the wall, Priya pressed against her chest. "What ritual? What are you talking about? She's just a baby, my baby." Kamala emerged from her room and Maya's heart shattered completely. Her mother-in-law's face was streaked with tears, but her expression held a resigned determination that spoke of acceptance rather than resistance. "Forgive me, Beta," Kamala whispered, using the endearing term that now sounded like a death sentence. "I tried to find another way. I prayed every day for the signs to be wrong. But the village elders have spoken. The goddess demands her offering." The brass vessel in Pandit Shukla's hands seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Maya could see dark stains on its surface and smell something metallic and terrible emanating from within. Other villagers carried ropes, more vessels, and bundles of herbs that filled the air with a sickly sweet aroma. The blood moon, under which she was born, happens only once in a generation. Sita, the school teacher, spoke with the authority of someone reciting a well-rehearsed lesson. "A child born with the crescent mark during such a time carries the power to grant our village protection for 50 years. The goddess Kali has blessed us with this opportunity." Maya's mind reeled as the full horror of their plan became clear. These people, her neighbors, her extended family, people who had celebrated Priya's birth just weeks ago, intended to sacrifice her daughter in some ancient ritual they believed would bring supernatural protection to their community. "You're all insane!" Maya screamed, but her voice seemed small against their collective certainty. "This is murder! You're talking about murdering an innocent child!" "Not murder," Pandit Shukla corrected with infuriating calm. "Transformation. Her soul will become one with the goddess, and her power will shield us from drought, disease, and disaster. She will achieve immortality while we receive divine favor." The logical part of Maya's mind struggled to process how educated people could believe such things, but the desperate part focused only on protecting her daughter. She looked toward the windows, calculating distances and obstacles. The villagers seemed to sense her thoughts and moved to block every exit. Young Mohan, barely 18, and someone Maya had helped with his studies just months ago, stepped forward with rope in his hands. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Didi. If you cooperate, we can make it quick and painless." The casual way he spoke about her daughter's death ignited something fierce and primal in Maya. She had never been a violent person, had never even raised her voice in anger, but now she felt capable of anything to protect Priya. "You want her?" Maya's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Come and take her." What followed was chaos that seemed to stretch beyond time. Maya fought with the desperate strength of a mother protecting her child, using furniture as weapons, and her knowledge of the house to her advantage. She managed to kick over oil lamps, plunging parts of the room into darkness. In the confusion, she bit, scratched, and struck at anyone who came near her daughter, but there were too many of them, and they had come prepared for resistance. Rough hands eventually pinned her arms while others pried Priya from her grasp. The baby's cries pierced the night air like accusations against everyone present. "No, please, no!" Maya's screams mixed with her daughter's wails as they bound her hands and feet. "She's innocent! She's done nothing wrong! Take me instead! Take my life!" Pandit Shukla looked at her with what might have been pity. "Your sacrifice would be meaningless. Only the marked child can fulfill this purpose. Try to understand. Your daughter will save hundreds of lives through her transformation." They carried struggling Maya and crying Priya out into the night, toward the ancient temple that sat at the edge of the village. Maya had visited this temple countless times, had prayed there for her daughter's health and happiness. Now it loomed before her like a gateway to hell. The temple grounds had been prepared for the ritual. Torches burned in careful arrangements, casting dancing shadows on stone walls carved with images of gods and demons. An altar had been set up in the center, surrounded by symbols drawn in what looked like dried blood and ash. The brass vessels were arranged in precise patterns, and the air hummed with chanted mantras that seemed to make the very stones vibrate. Other villagers had gathered to witness the ceremony. Maya recognized every face: shopkeepers, farmers, housewives, even children who should have been asleep in their beds. They watched with expressions of solemn reverence, as if they were about to witness something holy rather than horrific. "Please," Maya begged as they forced her to her knees near the altar. "She's just a baby. Look at her. Really look at her. She's scared and innocent. How can you do this?" Some of the villagers shifted uncomfortably, and Maya thought she saw doubt flicker in a few eyes. But Pandit Shukla began chanting more loudly, and the moment of possible mercy passed. They placed Priya on the altar, her tiny body looking impossibly small against the ancient stone. She had stopped crying, and now stared up at the stars with wide, trusting eyes that broke Maya's heart completely. In that moment, watching her daughter lie helpless while surrounded by people consumed by murderous fanaticism, something fundamental changed inside Maya. The grief and terror she felt began, transforming into something else, something cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. If these people could justify taking an innocent life for their beliefs, then Maya could justify anything she might do in response. As Pandit Shukla raised the ceremonial knife and began the final chants, Maya made a vow that transcended prayer or hope. If they killed her daughter, she would make them pay in ways they couldn't imagine. She would become something worse than any demon they feared, and she would show them what real darkness looked like. Maya held her newborn daughter close to her chest as she walked through the narrow streets of Kalvari village. The baby's soft cries mixed with the evening wind that carried the scent of jasmine and burning incense from the temple. At 19, Maya had never imagined motherhood would feel this overwhelming yet beautiful. Her husband Arjun worked in the city, sending money home each month, leaving her to care for their daughter alone in the ancestral home. The village of Kalvari sat, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, far from the noise of modern cities. Here, traditions ran deeper than the ancient wells, and superstitions held more power than logic. Maya had grown up listening to stories of spirits, curses, and rituals that the older villagers swore were real, As a child, she had dismissed them as tales meant to frighten children into obedience. Now, as a mother, she found herself more cautious, more aware of the shadows that seemed to dance differently in this place. Her mother-in-law, Kamala, had been acting strangely since the baby's birth 3 weeks ago. The old woman would mutter under her breath while grinding spices in the kitchen, casting worried glances toward the infant's cradle. When Maya asked what troubled her, Kamala would wave her hands dismissively and change the subject. But Maya noticed how her mother-in-law's friends visited more frequently now, speaking in hushed tones that stopped abruptly whenever Maya entered the room. The baby, whom they had named Priya, was unusually beautiful. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes sparkled with an intelligence that seemed beyond her days, and she rarely cried except when hungry. Neighbors who came to bless the newborn would stare at her with expressions Maya couldn't quite understand. Some looked afraid, others seemed mesmerized, and a few made protective gestures with their hands when they thought Maya wasn't watching. Old Devi, the village's most respected elder, had visited the day before. She examined Priya with the intensity of someone reading ancient scriptures, touching the baby's forehead and palms while chanting under her breath. When she finished, she pulled Maya aside and spoke in a voice heavy with concern. "Your daughter carries special marks," Devi had whispered, pointing to a small birthmark on Priya's shoulder that resembled a crescent moon. "Children born under the blood moon with such signs are believed to possess great power, but power attracts those who would misuse it." Maya had laughed nervously, thinking the old woman was sharing another village superstition. "She's just a baby deviante. What power could she possibly have?" Devi's weathered face had grown serious. "You are young and have lived away from our ways, child, but evil exists in forms you cannot imagine. Keep her close, trust no one completely, and if strange things begin happening, take her far from here." That conversation replayed in Maya's mind as she prepared Priya's evening meal. The baby slept peacefully in her cradle, tiny fists curled near her face. Maya found herself checking on her daughter more frequently than necessary, a growing unease settling in her stomach like a cold stone. As night fell, the village transformed. The cheerful sounds of children playing and women chatting faded, replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional bark of stray dogs. Maya noticed that the usual evening activities seemed muted tonight. The tea shop that normally buzzed with men playing cards had closed early. The temple bells, which rang every evening at sunset, remained silent. Kamala returned from her daily visit to the temple, looking more agitated than usual. She avoided Maya's eyes and went straight to her room, muttering prayers under her breath. The old woman's behavior had become increasingly erratic since Priya's birth, but tonight felt different. There was a fear in her movements that Maya had never seen before. Around midnight, Maya woke to the sound of whispers outside their house. At first, she thought it might be neighbors returning from a late gathering, but the voices carried a secretive quality that made her skin crawl. She peered through the wooden shutters and saw dark figures moving in the courtyard. They wore simple village clothes, but their faces were hidden by cloth, and they carried items Maya couldn't identify in the dim moonlight. Her heart began racing as she realized these weren't casual visitors. The figures moved with purpose, arranging objects in patterns around their house. Maya could make out the glint of metal implements and what appeared to be small bowls. The whispers grew more intense, taking on the rhythm of chanted prayers or incantations. Priya stirred in her cradle, making small sounds that seemed unusually loud in the tense silence. Maya quickly lifted her daughter, holding her close while trying to calm her own panic. She needed to wake Kamala, but something told her that her mother-in-law might already know about these midnight visitors. The chanting outside grew louder, and Maya recognized some of the voices. There was Raman, who ran the village grocery shop. She heard Sita, the schoolteacher, and even young Mohan, who helped at the temple. These weren't strangers or outsiders. They were people she saw every day, people she had trusted with her life. A cold realization washed over her as fragments of overheard conversations began making sense. The worried glances, the hushed discussions. Devi's warning. They had all been planning something involving her daughter. The birthmark, the blood moon, the supposed signs of power. It wasn't superstition to them. They believed it with a conviction that had driven them to gather in the darkness around her home. Maya clutched Priya tighter as the baby began to cry softly. Outside, the chanting reached a crescendo, and she heard footsteps approaching their door. Her mind raced through possible escape routes, but the house was surrounded. The back door led to a courtyard with high walls, and the front was blocked by the gathering crowd. As the door handle began to turn slowly, Maya realized that her peaceful life in Kalvari village was about to end forever. Whatever these people wanted with her daughter, they were prepared to take it by force. The ancient traditions and dark beliefs she had dismissed as harmless folklore were revealing their true, terrifying nature. The door creaked open, and Maya saw the silhouettes of familiar faces made unrecognizable by the intensity of their purpose. In that moment, she understood that she was completely alone, surrounded by people who would sacrifice everything, including an innocent child, for beliefs that existed beyond reason or mercy.